Hello, good morning. Thank you for having me. So I'm here to talk about a project we conducted several years ago, which was providing wireless to the Tour de France in Cambridge. The Tour de France, now I wasn't particularly familiar with it. I was notionally aware there was this cycle race that happened once a year. It is the #1 watched sporting event live in the world every year. About 10 to 12 million people watch it live. It's a huge event. It has about 200 cyclists covering 3,500 kilometers. It has 2,000 journalists following it with 86 TV stations and broadcast to 190 countries around the globe. It's genuinely a huge event. Cambridge, however, is a small market town, kind of on the edge of the Fens. Now, if you're not familiar with the Fens, think the rural bits of Holland, and you'll be kind of imagining the right landscape. And the university is probably something everybody's familiar with, the University of Cambridge. It often gets noted in the same breath as Oxford and Cambridge, the two great UK universities. There's always some rivalry, there's boat races, there's some discussion as to which is the #1 university in the UK. The answer's Cambridge, obviously. And I'm not just saying that, I'm going to give you a number, which is 96. That's how many Nobel Prizes have been affiliated to Cambridge University. That's about a dozen more than Oxford. And if you want some scale on that, Sweden has 31. Now, it sounds like a cheap pop at most of the audience. If I was after a cheap pop, I'd say that Finland has 5, which is almost the same amount as one of the pubs in Cambridge has associated to it. No, genuinely true. Right, so my job, I started there a little over 4 years ago, providing networks across the collegiate university. And one of the main projects I was given when I started was to develop a wireless solution that spans all the colleges, all the departments, all the institutions. We didn't have much of a wireless offering, and I had no experience of delivering wireless generally. So the general response is what we all do, is you sit down and you Google it, and you go, deploying wireless to university. And what you get is something that looks marginally like that. You kind of get a map of your campus and you draw red marks over it, and then you pick a building, and then you get building plans and you do some sort of RF heat map, and then you figure out how many access points you want, you buy them and you stick them on the wall, and wireless is deployed. That's fine for some environments. So this is a map of the centre of Cambridge. It's not all of Cambridge, but it's the city centre. You can see the river running through it. The blue buildings, they're the university buildings. So there's the department, schools, administration. They're not all on the map, but there's 362 of those in the city. The orange buildings, or whatever we're calling this colour, they're college buildings. There's 31 independent colleges, and they'll have about triple the amount of buildings in total that the university has. So there's over 1,000 of those. And then the red buildings are those that are affiliated to the university or generally owned by the university but used by somebody else. So it's a big estate. And then this is what at least some of the buildings looks like. That's Clare College. It's one of the courts. They're listed buildings, which brings with it its own problems. And then you go there and you say, right, we need to do a wireless deployment. Give me your floor plans. And the floor plans generally don't exist because these things were built long before CAD plans came along. What you get is, well, let me give you an example. So this is Darwin College. This is down by the river. This is a relatively new college, although not a new building. We did this a couple of months ago. You go there and you say, right, can we have some plans? Do you have any floor plans? And they go, yeah, of course we have. And then they go into this room and they kind of lift off the top of a box and they blow away some dust and they give you this. And that's basically the floor plans you work with. That's not actually a bad example, because that's clearly been drawn by somebody who's got some skill in drawing floor plans. That's typically what you're drawing with, something that, quite frankly, I could have drawn. So then you have to put that into your analysis software. So we use Ekahau, which is a well-known product. And it supports many formats, so you can import various AutoCAD files. Hand-drawn isn't one of the formats that they typically support, so you have to then overlay it into the program. And then you kind of do a walk around and you get a heat map. And then all you have to do is figure out which access points, how many access points you need. Or actually, you have to figure out which ones, because there's a whole range of access points with lots of different propagation properties and volume of users. And then you deploy them, apart from to the listed buildings, because they're listed and you can't attach anything to the wall. They're not all that old. A lot of them are 100 years old, and they're all kind of covered in asbestos. So you can't drill in the walls, you can't pull cables. There are a lot more modern buildings, but the modern ones typically just look like a Faraday cage, so you don't get any signal proliferation. But we work in IT because it's a challenge, right? Because it's interesting and each one's different. So you can't complain that much about having an interesting estate that's a bit of a challenge to deploy stuff to. So, and I'm going to apologise to Rob here, because regrettably, and this is slightly awkward, he told me just as I stood up that he actually went to Cambridge. I did something unusual when I started this job. I went and asked the students where they wanted Wi-Fi. I can put up that picture. That is kind of what they look like, isn't it? Yeah, kind of. I didn't go there. They wouldn't have had me. So you go and ask the students. You say, where would you like your wireless deployed? Now, I naively, admittedly, expected them to say the library, the debating theatre, and the botanic gardens. That's not what they said, was it? What they said was we'd love the pubs, the cafes, and the green spaces, inevitably. Now, once you get past the initial allergic reaction of, oh my God, have you seen how much of the city I've got to deploy wireless for, and I've got one guy doing this, the idea that I'm going to do all the stuff that isn't mine seems notionally ridiculous. Once you get past that, there are customers asking for our services in the places they want to consume it. It's not that ridiculous a request. We just had no way of figuring out how we were going to deliver that. So at this time, I was also asked to join so this is a local group, which is the county council. And the government in the UK has this process for improving broadband speed to various people that are in the less urban areas. So this is a mechanism where the government has a central pot of money. It gives it to the local councils, and then the local councils run some tendering process, and then they pass on the money to British Telecom, which is basically how it works. And then we have to kind of pretend that we're overseeing British Telecom spending it correctly. So I was at one of these meetings, and so this would have been December 2013, and I come out, and one of the women that I work with there, she said, oh, next year, we've got the Tour de France coming to Cambridge, because they do the first 3 stages typically in another country that isn't France. And the 3rd stage is going to start in Cambridge. It's going to go Cambridge to London. It's going to be a great event. It's going to get a lot of international focus. We have a plan to be a hyper-connected city, whatever that means. It would be great if you could deploy wireless for free across the city centre. So that sounded like an interesting, it kind of met direction with what we wanted to do. Bearing in mind, this was January 2014. So I said, look, I'm going to have to go speak to my guys. I'm going to have to go have a word and see if we can actually deploy this. So we went away and there we go, looked at what we knew and what we didn't know. So at this point, we'd got pretty good at deploying wireless access points. We're up to deploying about 1,000 a year. And it's kind of an ongoing process, so we got fairly familiar with how that works. And the council had said you can use all our buildings. Not that there was many, but you can use our buildings and our assets to deploy wireless. So we knew that. What we didn't know, I certainly didn't have any money for it. There was no allocation of money coming from anywhere. We'd never deployed an external access point. Now, we all presumed at this point that deploying an external access point was pretty much the same as deploying an internal access point, but it had some weatherproofing, something. We didn't know how to deploy free Wi-Fi, so we're a university. All of our customers are 18 and over, and there's kind of a lot of research going on, so we don't filter web content. Now, we were kind of aware that if we're going to allow anybody onto this free public Wi-Fi, that might not be great publicity in the long run. So we're going to have to give that some thought. We didn't know the range, so we didn't know how far apart we were going to have to deploy access points. And what we didn't know was about planning and planning consent. We know that might be an issue. One of my guys said, well, how many people are we catering for? What is the size of this tower? So, great question. I emailed my counterpart at the local council and asked how many people, and they said our preliminary analysis suggests somewhere between 5,000 and 150,000. Okay? So, bearing in mind all of those things, we thought it sounded like a really interesting thing to do and better than the day job. So we thought, screw it, we'll give it a go. And it was about February 24 when we decided that we'll definitely have a go at this. So we started with, and that's July the 7th. That's the day of the Tour de France. That's what they call in projects a hard deadline. That can't be pushed back. So you start with a map of where the tour is going to go. You accept that you're not going to get free Wi-Fi across all of Cambridge in 5 months. So you just figure we'll work around the route. So that's a map of the city centre, and the yellow line you can barely see is the route. And then we started drawing red stars on the route. And that was basically as technical as it got. We kind of sat down with a biro and figured out where looked about right to put wireless access points without really knowing where or how we were going to connect them. Now, one thing that's contextually useful is we own, as mentioned, our own metropolitan area fibre network. So we have 55 kilometres of this stuff, and it goes kind of near most of the route, which is helpful. So we had that to our advantage. So the next thing we did is we knew where the route was going. We went and ordered ourselves a really big map, a kind of 2-metre tall map by 3 metres wide. And then we just broke it down into individual projects and figured that's where we would deploy access points. And then the individual projects looks like this. So just to walk through one, there's the initial site survey and coverage. Fine. Premise approval, so whoever's building, and if it's a college building, you'd have to go ask the college for their approval. Local authority planning consent, not sure about that. Power arrangements, somebody's got to pay for the power, and it isn't going to be me. What else? GBN, that's our fibre. So we've got to agree to get our fibre to somewhere within the proximity of an access point. We need a way leave. That's the permission to keep the thing there once you've connected it up. So that's like a legally binding agreement that I've installed it, you can't go and steal it at that point. Section 50 is if you need to dig up the road. So that's the local authority consent to dig up a road or footway if you need to do that. You need to order equipment. We need to install the fibre, install the equipment, test it, and do some RF frequency planning, and give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room because we want to make sure this thing's live in time. Of those, the one item that had us concerned was local authority planning consent. So I did what everybody does in Cambridge, is you get on a bike, and then you cycle to the local planning authority, and I met with Toby, and Toby was a nice guy. And I said to him, look, I've got these access points. I didn't actually have an access point at the time, but I'd seen a picture of them. I've got access points that are probably around here, and they consume as yet an unknown amount of power, but we want to put them up in the city centre for the Tour de France. It'll be really good. It'll be great for publicity. And he was very keen. He said, absolutely. I said, well, I need planning permission. He said, no, that should be fine, as long as you don't put them in a conservation area. I said, where's the conservation area? Well, that's the map of the city centre, and the red line's the route. The green bit is the conservation area. He said, you're going to need planning consent for that. I said, I've no experience in doing this. He said, it's dead simple. Just draw me up some technical plans, write a description, we'll fast pass it through planning, and then we'll get it approved, you'll be fine. I can't do technical drawings, but we do have an estate management building department some of them are kind of useful, helpful guys. So I got back on my bike and cycled over there, and I explained it, kind of excited. We want to do this thing for the Tour de France. And the guy I chatted to said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. I can draw you up your technical plans. Give me the dimensions, I'll draw it. So I left it with him. And then it went quiet for 2 weeks, which is never a good sign at a university when things go quiet. And then I had an email from the secretary of the Resource and Planning Committee. Now, secretary sounds like a junior role. It's not at a university. That's a really senior person. And he sent me an email out of the blue. He said he's got a number of concerns. One, estate management don't have the resources to do the planning. I thought, I'll do it myself. He said, two, it's not appropriate for departments of the university to make independent planning applications. I can't do it myself. Three, in any case, you don't have the time. Thanks for that. Just to make his point clear, he then said, paragraph 3.6 of the Sites and Buildings Regulations, whatever that is, implies that the university cannot seek planning consent without the endorsement of the building committee, never heard of that, which apparently meet twice a year. As far as I can see, this project is highly unlikely to proceed. So I did the only thing, I had the only rational response, and that I sulked for about 2 days. I didn't tell any of my staff, because we didn't have that kind of time left in the timeline to make them stop. We just carried on. And then after a couple of days, I thought, I'm going to need to go read this building site planning regulation. So it's in a book called Statutes and Ordinances, which looks like that. No, genuinely, it's as Harry Potter as you would imagine it to be. Right? You kind of pull off this big leather thing and you break open, and inside, it looks like that. And you have to kind of find the bit. And it said 3.7 was the section. Now, the previous guy had mentioned 3.6, so he wasn't accurate, and that gave me hope. It said, the Buildings Committee oversees applications for planning approvals for the operational estate and is consulted by Cambridge University Press and Cambridge Assessment about planning applications for premises and land in the city of Cambridge. Planning applications which it considers are inconsistent with the university's long-term estate strategy and agreed principles and policies for planning and design may be referred to the Estate Strategy Committee before any approval is given. It seems fairly comprehensive. It really does. And then I read it again and I thought about it. And then I picked out this phrase, operational estate. I thought, what is the operational estate? I need consent for the operational consent. The operational estate is just the buildings the university owns. So it occurred to me that if we didn't use any university assets, and I didn't work with any of my university colleagues, we could still deliver this project. We were back on. We just have to find somebody else to work with. So I went back to the guys. I said, look, it's fine. You're just going to have to bin all your previous ideas. We'll just have to find somewhere new to attach these, bearing in mind that the university owns most of the city centre. So we went to the Parker's Piece. Now, this is a big square in the middle of Cambridge. It's about 250, 300 metres along each side. And that's where the depart was going to start. That's where most people are going to gather. And one of my guys who was looking after the wireless, he'd done some analysis of how many access points we'd need to cover it. And by analysis, I mean he'd downloaded a tool off Google and then drawn green umbrellas over the side. And he said, look, John, he said, we just can't cover this size of green space with access points at the sides. You're going to need to put one in the middle of Parker's Piece, at least one. So there is a lamppost in the middle of Parker's Piece. It is the only listed lamppost in the UK. And I said, they're just not going to allow us to put an access point on a listed lamppost. But they said, well, we can't do this unless we get consent. So I got back on my bike, I go back to the planning office, I meet Toby. I said, look, I really want to put an access point on there. Any chance we can put one up? He said, absolutely no way. All right, so I left that. And then we went away for a few days and we discussed all sorts of building a contraption that went around the side of the lamppost, that kind of temporary structure. So we went back to Toby and Toby said, still no way. I'm not letting you put anything on that. He said, it's a real shame you're not doing this in about 3 weeks' time. I was like, what happens in 3 weeks' time? He said, we're putting up loads more lampposts in Parker's Piece. I said, really? Now, they've been trialling these things, which are kind of lampposts that rise out the floor and drop back down. Now, I'm not going to explain to this group why rising out the floor and going back down during the day is bad for wireless access points. He said, no, we've tried these. These are rubbish. Everybody hates these. We're going to do more of that kind of lamppost. We'll just have another 6 of them, and we're going to put them up around the park. I said, fantastic. Can I put wireless access points on them? He said, no. We've spent a long time designing these for you not to screw them up with wireless access points. So I went back to the office, and we're chatting with the guys, and one of the guys said, this kind of cone at the top, I said, it's called a finial. He said, right, the finial. He said, can we get an access point inside one of the new finials? Well, so this is what the access points we had looked like at the time. These are Aruba AP175s. They're kind of square things. They're not going to go inside anything discreetly, quite frankly. So that definitely was it. We kind of took one apart to see what it looked like on the inside. It wasn't going to work. Our Aruba rep was visiting us 2 days later, and he looked at this. He goes, well, you don't want to be using them anyway. You want to be using these. These are Aruba 275. This is the new generation. It does 802.11 AC. He said much better capacity. I said, great. When can I have some? He said, well, we haven't built them yet. I said, well, when are you building them? He said, well, we're hoping to get some off the production line in Mexico in a few weeks' time. OK. When we get them off the production line, do they work on, do you have firmware to run these things? He said, we're definitely hoping to get some firmware beta out. So there gets to a point in a project when you're that mired in risk that a little bit more doesn't seem to make any difference at that point. So we thought, well, we'll give it a whirl. And then we thought, right, so we need to now redevelop the top of a lamppost. I joined networking. I wasn't meant to be doing lampposts. I redeveloped the top of a lamppost to put one of these in without the arm and that top bit, because that's probably not important. So we go off to the engineering department, and the engineering department have their own work crew, this group of guys, and we explain what we want. And we said, the lamppost hadn't arrived at that point, so we want something like that with a bracket that will hold one of these, and then he said a cone on top. I said, it's a finial. It's a finial. Anyway, so they developed something, and it looks like that, which is what we did. Now, the trouble is, these things are more than 100 meters from a cabinet. So what we had to do is we had to drop Cat6 cables down the lamppost. Then in the base of the lamppost, we had to steel power out the lamppost itself, use a power injector and a media converter, and then use our existing fiber optic network to get it back to a cabinet. The good thing is, as they were putting these up, they were digging up the paths to put power to these lampposts. So whilst they were doing that, I had a man run behind them with a bit of fiber, just throwing it into the ground. So that's what the lampposts look like. So then we move on to the rest of town. Now, the rest of town's tricky because it's a conservation area. So we spent a while wandering around, and the one thing we missed on our early analysis was CCTV posts. So we took the opportunity.
So by now, are you 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month?
So this would have been mid to late May at this point, maybe a bit later. In fact, we were doing this more or less at the same time as the other, maybe early June. So it's the window's getting narrower at this point. So CCTV posts. So again, back on the bike, off to the CCTV man. Now, there's something interesting about people who run CCTV systems. They're very aware that the rest of society holds them in great disdain. He was a really nice chap, and he was very pleased to help us, mainly because we were nice to him. And being nice to him and saying we were going to put something that the public might actually like on one of his CCTV posts went down very well with us. To the extent that he, 1, gave us a map of all his CCTV, 2, gave us keys to access the base unit of all the CCTV posts, and 3, gave us unilateral opportunity to use the ducting that goes in there as well. So that's what we did. We started, you can see an access point more or less installed on the side of a CCTV post. They're great because they've got a very wide base. You can put in media converters in the bottom. You get a lot of room to work with. So then we carried on around town installing these things. And you can see on top of rooftops, council rooftops, CCTV posts. Now, it was at this point, one of my guys, one of the network installers, he said, are we worried about lightning? Now, I hadn't thought about lightning to that point. I said, not really. In the unlikely event of these getting struck by lightning, it's 800 quid, it's very unlikely. He goes, no. What if somebody's holding a post and your access point acts as the conductor for the lightning and you fry the individual? I thought, well, I don't like that. That wasn't the publicity I was after with this project. So it's okay, you can get lightning arresters. So we quickly run out and buy a shed load of lightning arresters and attach them all in. We get a test controller, because we're not going to run this outdoor stuff on our live system with our beta version of firmware. So we get our test controller, we turn it on, and it's incredibly disappointing. 5 gigahertz was good, 2.4 gigahertz, rubbish. You'd authenticate, you'd drop off, the throughput was terrible. So we played around this for a while, we couldn't figure it out. We got a guy from Aruba to come down, he tried to figure it out. It turns out that city centres are full of GSM equipment that broadcast on 2.1. It turns out that lightning arresters are a perfect aerial and conductor for GSM and anything in the 2 gigahertz frequency. So we can't run these with lightning conductors unless, like, everybody's pretending that they're knowledgeable in the audience. We didn't know. You need a bandpass filter to filter out specific bands here, the nods of the heads. Where were you 2 years ago? So all we need is to get some bandpass filters. So we contact Aruba, and they said, no, the lead time on these is ridiculous. You can't get hold of bandpass filters. So we thought about it, and we thought, well, we'll look at the long-term forecast. We'll just disconnect the lightning arrestor for the duration of the Tour de France, then do it afterwards, and we'll probably be fine. We'll probably get away with it. And I was chatting to a colleague at Anglia Ruskin, which is the other university in Cambridge, and he said, and this came up as a subject, he said, lightning arresters, I've got a box of them underneath my bandpass filters, I've got a box of them under my desk, which were Aruba ones. So we just went around and installed them, and that fixed it. It was an unexpected downside. Now, next. So we've got wireless, we've got 2.4 and 5 gigahertz running, and this is now mid-June, so we're kind of happy. We've got Eduroam, which is the academic SSID network. What we don't have is anything for the public, and we haven't really addressed this. Now, fortunately, at the time, Janet's our NREN, I think SUNET, SUNET, is the Swedish equivalent. They'd just signed a deal with B-Sky B, which is Rupert Murdoch's kind of dark side public company, to broadcast public SSIDs over our Janet network. So we did the decent thing, and we just signed a 12-month contract to broadcast their network. And then we got the marketing team to skin it, and we got it going. Now, this is the launch event. I'm pulling a slightly odd face. We've worked quite hard on this. The guy on the right, who we've not seen for the entire project, is the head of the city, or mayor, I think, Lewis Herbert. He never appeared at any of the planning meetings. The woman in the middle I've never seen before in my life, but she was very happy to turn up for the photo opportunity. Good for her. So this is what it looked like on the day. So it was a lovely day. It was very busy. And this is what the stats looked like leading up. So we've got it on soft launch a week beforehand, and you've got a rough idea of traffic going through. And I think those bars are every 2 hours, so we were peaking about 16 terabytes an hour at some point, which is over, and we're talking, to give you a sense, about 25 access points at the time. This is connections to the wireless. So here we've got départ fictif and départ réel. So départ fictif is when they leave the city centre and these 200 riders cycle past ever so slowly, and that's when it goes in front of the crowds. So people are actually disconnecting. They're probably filming at that point or watching the cyclists go by. The green bit is when they leave the city and then they disappear off. And at that point, everybody tries to connect to wireless and upload their images to Facebook or Instagram or whatever it might be at that moment in time. That's some stats from the area we covered in the city centre. About 20,000 devices at that moment in time were authenticated over the wireless. Observations. Number of devices was considerably less than the footfall, or number of connected devices. So we still have the system, it's still being used, and it's still at capacity every day, pretty much all the time. Lots of people couldn't connect, but I could. Anecdotal. The cloud router, the B-Sky B router, is desperately under-spec'd. was under spec, and we certainly need to write better monitoring scripts. So we learned that. So where do we go next? Where's the development? Because that should have been the end of the story, bathe in our own glory. Well, it kind of sprung a good relationship with the local council, because they liked this. They liked us giving away something free for the citizens as part of the university's good engagement. So every time they replace lampposts, every time that they dig up a path, that's Jesus Green. They kind of replace the path. You can't, it's a terrible photo. But we've put more of these buckets. We've amended them for these particular lampposts, which is great. So we get to extend our fibre network at very low or negligible cost, and they get free public Wi-Fi, which is good because that's just by the beer festival, which is on Jesus Green. That's a wonderful opportunity to go and check the RF frequency repeatedly over the course of the week. And we're in the middle of deploying to the boathouses. So why do all of this when we've got so many other buildings? And also in my remit is cybersecurity and fibre and routed networks, because that is much better than my office. It's a great thing to do on a sunny day. We're also extending to the train station, and we've just ripped out the cloud and we've replaced it with a local supplier, which is much better. So we're all happy about that. Lessons learned. It's what people want to see. So for this project, we worked with Aruba, and Aruba were great. Vanix, our supplier of Aruba, put it this way, we've ditched them since they're a kind of local supplier. They were rubbish, but Aruba were great. Cambridge University, I didn't work with at all on this project. Cambridge County Council and City Council were good. Then Connecting Cambridgeshire, the Highways Agency, civils contractors, CCTV. It's about a list of 20 different organisations. Deploying wireless in an urban environment, in a conservation area, is really difficult. I know why most people don't do it. It's very complicated. We were kind of lucky because we had the Tour de France as a definitive line. If you don't have that day, everybody's prepared to just let things slip by a couple of weeks. Where are we now? So this is our IDROM, this is our domestic wireless. We see about 30,000, the green ones are our own users of our wireless system each month. We see about the same of visitors from other academia. So that's the purple one. They're non-Cambridge academic users of our wireless network. So we see about 80,000 unique users a month. We've got it doesn't work. I've tried embedding this into the thing. It's a map of the world. We can plot where our users are coming from by their authentication, and then we map it over the world so we can see all the areas that Cambridge is actually engaging with. It's about 900 institutions are represented there each month. And then we see some big numbers, large amounts of sessions, arrow goes up to the right, traffic goes up. Interesting thing with wireless more generally is we have a 40 gig connection for the university, soon to go to 80 gigabit connection to Janet. We have about a quarter of our traffic is now over wireless. So that's 38 petabytes of data this year will be going over our Janet connection. About a quarter of that is wireless. Now that's a large amount. What you've got to do is put in context that we are also a node for CERN, and we do a lot of gene sequencing stuff where we exchange. There is an awful lot of people doing Facebook updates on their phones, as far as I can consider. And it's growing all the time. And that is how we deployed wireless in a city centre.
Okay, thank
you.
So we've got some time for questions. If there's any questions for John, thank you for a fantastic presentation, John.
Thank you.
Yes.
All the riders, they carry wireless equipment. Do you know all the bike riders, the competitors? Do you know what technology that is?
I don't. I mean, I know they're carrying stuff because they broadcast a feed from the cameras, but it's certainly not over. It's not over 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. I couldn't tell you what they're using. But certainly there's a lot of live feed going on at the time. At any one moment in time, there's 2 helicopters above the Tour de France, so whether they're using those to proxy or relay.
Communication is for the riders and their team leaders.
I couldn't tell you. Couldn't tell you.
Another question for John? Just wait for the mic for a second.
Thank you. Håkan Myllenbock from Comhem. I've seen other stories from UK where they put access points in manholes. Did you ever consider that?
So I think that's what Virgin Media are doing. They're relaying stuff through manholes. My understanding is that is still a test in small parts of London, and they're not extending that out as yet. No, we didn't think of manholes. It doesn't strike me as a great place to have wireless for a whole bunch of reasons, to be perfectly honest. But possibly, I'd be interested to see how that plays out. I mean, you can see the temptation. It's near where your fibre is, or your copper in their case, and it should be relatively cheap, and not many people steal manholes.
Any more questions for John? No? Oh, well, thank you. Once again, could you join me in thanking John for a fantastic presentation?
Thank you. Cheers.